Welcome to the Blue Dog Whisperer and Aiden. What else are we doing?
The Scarlet State on WRSU, but not on WRSU today. So
It will be on Spotify though,
I
for
was going to
both.
say yes.
Yeah,
Gonna
yeah.
say,
So for those of my listeners who don't know, I co-host a show on Rutgers Radio with Aiden DeMarsey called the Scarlet State. So my lovely co-host,
Aiden DeMarsey.
because he makes fun of me all the time for how I say it, right?
Oh yes, yeah. It's funny because we always introduce the show, and I'm always, I always say, and our lovely co-host, and he goes Evan Grollman, and he does it in such a way that is just the Evan Grollman fashion that I am disappointed to not hear when we miss the show.
Man.
So I'm going to need you to say it at least once throughout this episode in order
All
to make my week successful.
I tell you what, while you're in the middle of saying something that I don't like, I'm going to interrupt you with that.
Sounds good, Evan. Sounds good.
That is if you say something I don't like, which I don't know, but we'll see. Maybe if even if it's something that I like, I might do it. Who knows?
I was gonna say if it's major agreement or major disagreement, Evan, and I'll have to figure out which one it is.
Right, right. So we have a lot to talk about regarding
Yes.
New Jersey news and also national news. So, Aiden, what do you want to start with first? The vice presidential debate?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I mean, that was, somewhat of a surprise, I would say, to a lot of us who tuned in to watch it. I've never watched a vice presidential debate before in live time. I've only ever seen the clips. And quite frankly, I don't know about you, Evan, but I was impressed. Um, I think that both Tim Walz and JD Vance showed a way of communicating with each other that I think we need as Americans to model off of, right? When Tim Walz mentioned that his son had experienced the shooting incident, JD Vance didn't look at it as a political thing and try to say, "Oh, well, just because of that doesn't mean you can take away guns." He looked at it and as a father looked at him and said, "I'm sorry. That's really unfortunate." And that's an emotional experience. And I think that the American people were wanting something like that, right? As we know, vice presidential debates don't always get as much attention as the presidential does. Which obviously there's plenty to have been said about the presidential debate that the two of them that we had this year. And at the end of the day, I think we're just kind of looking at what happened last week as some sort of what the future looks like, right? In what may be a post-Trump Republican Party or a post-Biden-Harris Kamala Democratic Party. It's a very divided time. We know this, and if that's what more of the debates will look like going forward, then I'm satisfied. I think it's a positive direction. Then again, that could also just be a symptom of it being the vice presidential debate. They had the opportunity to ignore some of the rhetoric, to ignore some of the divisive nature of some of the topics, and focus more on the details and the policies, because they knew anybody tuning in was, somebody who, like I said, is paying attention and because it doesn't often attract the most obscure viewers. So those are just some of my overall thoughts. As far as in general of who won the debate, I am going to give it to JD Vance because I think he proved himself more than Tim Walz did. The expectations on JD Vance were a lot higher than they were on Tim Walz as far as demonstrating a resemblance of he had this notion of being a Republican who was further to the right, who was somebody who came during the Trump era of politics, who some of the rumors going out there about him, they just labeled him as a weird guy, right? And I think what he did was he proved himself more than Tim Walz did as far as saying, "Hey, I'm just just a guy, right, from Ohio who came up from a humble background, and now I'm here on the vice president debate stage after a lot of hard work and grit, and he has charisma, and I think that I think he proved himself. On Tuesday night. So those are just some of my immediate thoughts. Evan, I'm curious to see what you have in mind about the debate.
Well, I do think JD Vance is weird. I think Tim Walz is also weird, not as weird as JD Vance, but I just want to stress that there's not necessarily anything wrong with being weird. It depends on what kind of weird. So I do think that JD Vance managed to rebrand himself in that debate. I thought it was all an act on his part, but I do appreciate the civil nature that both candidates exhibited during the debate, especially when Tim Walz brought up his son. I agree with you. That was very human of Vance, and we have not always seen a human side of him, especially when he orders donuts in Georgia. Because to be perfectly honest, did you see that video of JD Vance ordering donuts in Georgia?
I don't think I have. No.
Okay. It reminded me of the guy who goes into a nightclub, and I'm not that guy, but a guy who goes into a nightclub trying to pick up women and he has no idea how to talk to women. If there's one thing that Americans can agree on, is that donuts are delicious. And the fact that JD Vance ordered donuts and said whatever makes sense, I mean, even diabetics like donuts, let's be honest. I mean, it was kind of what I would imagine would happen if an alien had no idea what donuts tasted like. Uh, so I actually do think that the expectations were a lot lower for JD Vance, and he exceeded it. So Tim Walz had a lot more to lose. At times, Tim Walz came off as very nervous and very scattered. There is something off about Tim Walz too. I'm not going to lie. I honestly thought that Josh Shapiro should have been the vice presidential nominee for Kamala. Of course, that did not go through. They chose Walz. Walz, I think, is a good person at heart. I just think that he had a tough time conveying that. Not conveying the message of having a good heart, but conveying a message of being on top of things. He did seem a little scattered.
I think I think what we're going for here, and we both agree, these aren't bad men. They're not bad people, right? These are people who care about their country, both JD Vance and Tim Walz. These are people who have kind of demonstrated a sense of patriotism in the aspect of JD Vance is a senator from Ohio. He served his country. Tim Walz served his country. He's the governor of Minnesota. And a lot of what we have analyzed presidential elections to have been is a question of character, right? And that's what a lot of people have an issue with, with some of the two presidential candidates, is a question of their character. The vice presidential side of things, I don't know if that's the question. I think what we saw was a lot of the policy issues, right? Which is why I kind of get frustrated when people are like, oh, Tim Walz is weird or JD Vance is weird, right? Because what we saw last week is they delved deep into the issues. They talked about the economy. They talked about immigration in a way that wasn't being talked about at the presidential debates or really in the entire campaign. And taking that into account, you have to give the two men credit for presenting both their views of what America should look like. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the policies put out there by Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. I don't think it'll address the deep-rooted issues in our economy right now. I think a lot of Americans are suffering. I think that with more government spending, we're only going to continue to see rising inflation. We're only going to continue to see an economy that doesn't actually address the root cause of the economic harm for any inner city Americans, rural Americans, middle class Americans, and everyone in between. But putting that aside, I mean, like I was saying though, that was what was put out there, right? Is the policy visions, and I think that's what we need a far more picture on, right? Because people are rallied up about issues. People are enthusiastic to try and address them in the way they can, or the way that the candidates say they want to. But as far as the details, we don't actually know. And so when President Trump becomes president, or Vice President Harris becomes president, either one of those two scenarios, we don't actually know what we're getting, right? And I think that's what we saw 4 years ago as well, and even 4 years before that, right? I think what we did with this vice president is we saw a glimpse of old style, right? I mean, back in the early 2000s, even mid 2000, early 2010s, some of the debates that kind of were more focused on the issues that America was facing at the time, whether it be the Iraq War, the war on terror in general, the recession, all those sort of things that were happening then. We're facing a lot of similar issues now when it comes to foreign policy and the economy. And, people are forgetting that how the president's job is to set the policy and set the agenda, right? And it's Congress's job to pass into law those different things, should they view it in the best benefit of the people. putting the politics aside for a second, when we're talking about how the government works, that's that, and I think, like I said, with this vice president debate, we got far more of policy visions and far more of, what the proposals for each party is. I think you're seeing a more moderated Republican Party with some of the policies that they had put out there. Not moderated, but maybe moderate is not the best word, but simply put, more in touch, right? I mean, when JD Vance addressed the issue of abortion, right? I mean, that's something that Democrats would hammer Republicans on. Um, and to me, the way he kind of humanized it and said, listen, my party, we don't always have the best way of presenting this idea of pro-choice versus pro-life, right? But there's a common ground that we could find, and by recognizing that women are fearful of the Republicans for some of the rhetoric that's been put out there, I think it's very fair for him to say, we need to earn their trust back, right? And I think it's a very strategic way of looking at it. And President Trump has said multiple times that he would not sign into law a national abortion ban. So you see a policy shift, right? As the base of the Republican Party has shifted to a more blue collar, working class populism, so are the policy ideas. It's less so an ideological or theological sort of vision, and it's more so an economical vision. And I think that's crucial for at least the future of the party, anyway. So, overall, I would say I'm more excited about a guy like JD Vance after this debate than I am before this debate. And regarding Tim Walz, I mean, he did have stumbles. He did have, some things that I don't fault him for that, though. I will say I don't fault him for that. I don't think it's necessarily his fault. Obviously, your prime time, right? This is a guy who's a teacher, and then he became governor. Now he's running for vice president of the United States. I don't think he was the best pick. But you know what? He's human and he's going to stumble. And as he said, he's a knucklehead at times, right? Which I'm curious what your thoughts on that comment were, or even really his record of kind of exaggerating some of the different things that he's done in his life. Not to say that he hasn't done any good things, because I'm sure, as a veteran, he's done great things. But at the end of the day, I'm not disappointed in him. I looked at this debate and I saw that these are two people with drastically different visions for America, as far as how we fix the issue. Not different visions for America. They share a vision, but drastically different roads to get to the solution point. So, I guess that kind of concludes my thoughts. I went on a big ramble there, but you know what? It was a good debate. I would say overall it was a really good debate.
Right. And I suspect we're voting for different candidates because, like you, I share the concerns about government spending. My thought
Yeah.
is that government has to live within its means, especially when things are heading in the right direction. Inflation is going down. So now is the time to cut spending in areas that make sense. If we can raise the minimum wage, maybe we can get people off of food stamps, maybe we could get people off of welfare, because the minimum wage has not been raised in over a decade. So I think that would be something that I would absolutely want to see, because I think a lot of people have this idea that they can make more money staying at home collecting government benefits instead of working. And I think we need to incentivize working. And one of the things that I think is a real problem on both sides in different in different with respect to both sides is that I remember the Christie years when he was governor, and I liked him to an extent, but he demonized teachers, and we also see the left is demonizing the police officers and law enforcement. And in addition to that, and I've always said this, the three professions that are the punching bag for Americans are law enforcement, educators, and customer service workers. And we tell people to get jobs, and then when they do get jobs, we demonize the people in those professions. So much so that now in New Jersey and other places, we're seeing, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, Aiden, in Wawa, if you go to the bulletin board, the Department of Corrections is advertising for correction officer positions and stressing the starting pay because no one wants to do this in New York. NYPD are being recruited out to Suffolk County because the mayor's office and I mean, de Blasio and Eric Adams, they just don't have the back of law enforcement. So I think that we should be moving people from welfare to work, and I'm hopeful, but I'm not sure that Kamala Harris is going to do that.
You know, I'm afraid I'm going to have to agree with you, and not even for the political aspect of it. Most people know that I tend to lean Republican. I've voted for Democrats before. That's not something I think that we should. We shouldn't always be strictly partisan, right? I ran for office with my best friend who was a Democrat, and we're actually doing a fun event up at Montclair pretty soon. It's a fundraiser for one of his organizations up there, and it's pie a Democrat or Republican, right? And people get to come up and pay $5 and or I don't forget what the amount of money is, but they get to pie one of us based on whichever they want to choose. I have a feeling at MSU
Give me
I'm
a
going to get a lot
discount.
more. If you want to come up to MSU, I'll give you a discount. I just have a feeling as a Republican, I'm going to get a lot more pie at MSU than he is as a Democrat. So, but
Listen, on a university in Montclair, yeah.
I was going to say, I shouldn't have agreed to this, but no, it should be fun. He's treating me to the diner after, so I can't turn away the diner. But no, not even for the politics of it, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to agree with you. I just think that when people ask the question, why or what are you going to do to help my life make it easier at the grocery store? What are you going to do to help me at the gas pump? What are you going to do as a leader of our country to try and issue in another era of prosperity? Because we are not in an era of prosperity right now. And the answer that we get is, I grew up in a middle-class economy or in a middle-class family. That's not easing anybody's mind. That's not telling us what your ideas are to fix the problem. And it tells me that right now, not that Democrats are always wrong on the issues, because I'm never going to, speak in absolutes like that. I just don't think that they have the playbook right now to address this crisis, this economic crisis. And I think that's partially because of the polarization that we've seen in our country. You have a lot of Democrats who are now, a lot more radicalized. Same thing with the Republican Party. Don't get me wrong, right? That's the case for both. But in specifics to the economy and the economic issues, they're more radicalized. Republicans are more radicalized on the social issues. Whether that be, the trans issues, LGBTQ plus issues, whatnot. The Democrats are much more radicalized on these socialist ideas. You have the Squad, openly calling for some very socialist line policies. And it's hard right now, especially with such a slim majority in any event, it's probably going to be a slim majority for each party in Congress, to mobilize your entire party, if you're the Democrats, to address some of these economic problems, right? Because let me tell you what, a UBI is not going to fix the economy, right? Kamala Harris just came out in favor of reparations. That is not going to fix the economy. Some of these more further left economic ideas, they're not going to work, right? You have immigrants who are coming here, legal ones anyways, from socialist countries, and you talk to some of them, and they're just they're not in favor of any of this because they left their country because of the socialism, and now they're coming to America, and they're saying, hey, we're not necessarily a socialist country, but we're seeing some of these policies that are being proposed that would make us a socialist country, and that's very fearful to a lot of them. And I understand that sounds very rhetorical, but it's real because I am very active in and around politics in Burlington County, and at one of our Evesham meetings that we had, there was an immigrant from Eastern Europe who was under the rule of the Soviet Union, and he said, some of the things we're seeing now is what I saw as a citizen of the Soviet Union. There is not a more direct source that you could get than that, right? And I understand it's anecdotal, but there is not a more direct storyline that you could receive than what that man said. And all of us who were at that meeting kind of just looked at him and were like, wow, this is getting serious.
Right.
I think a really good way, kind of piggybacking off the vice presidential debate, a really good way to just explain our times right now is people are scared. People are fearful of the future. They're not feeling hopeful. And typically the Democrats do successful on a message of hope. And, here's the change we want to make our lives better. But they don't have the people right now don't have any hope to go off of. They're just seeing the negative. They're just seeing the poor economy, the immigration crisis. They're paying, more. We're paying more than any other country for things like healthcare. Some of the foreign policy issues. Our world seems like it's crumbling apart with some of these anti-Semitic attacks on Israel and our strongest ally in the Middle East, with Iran doing what it's doing over there. With the war in Ukraine, all that going on. Although there hasn't been much movement as far as the front lines go, it's still an ongoing conflict. Not only that, but we're talking about nuclear armed nations here, right? Iran, they very well could have nuclear weapons.
Right.
We there's really no way to tell. So at the end of the day, people are just scared. And I think when people are scared, um, you know, they're far more likely to tend to vote against the incumbency. Um, so that's something that Kamala has tried to run from in this election, is the fact that um, she has been vice president for 3.5 years. And as somebody who, I understand that the role of the vice president is different and that they don't implement policy, but they are one of the biggest factors in shaping policy. They're one of the last voices the president hears before they make a decision. I don't know if we're seeing a lot of teamwork between Joe and Kamala. I don't, which, even though I'm a Republican, as an American, it just makes me upset because, I want them to do well. I want our country to do well. I don't want the politics. I want the success of an American public. So it's unfortunate, but she hasn't been there. She hasn't showed up to the job to do what she can, or even spoken out about doing what she can to address the issues. Right. I think that's something that is going to hurt her on election day. I think she's going to have to answer to that, and we'll see how it goes. Just out of curiosity, what's your thoughts on some of these polls coming out of these states? I mean, we see Pennsylvania tightening up, Michigan's tightening up, Wisconsin. Obviously it's always been in play, but I don't think we've seen as much movement there. But still, some closer calls. I mean, Arizona, that seems like it's favoring Trump. North Carolina seems like it's favoring Trump, although I actually think that one was probably the closest of the so-called redder states, of the swing states. Anyways, I'll let you answer the question. What are your thoughts on some of these polls that we're seeing out of these battleground states, and how it shapes the presidential side of things?
I really do think it's a coin toss. I think that I'm going to say what I think Trump has going for him, and I'm going to say what I think Kamala has going for her. As far as Trump, what he has going for him, and you just said it, is that when people feel scared, they're more likely to vote against the incumbent. Now, technically, Kamala is not president, but she is vice president, and people might want to change from business as usual. The other thing, a lot of times when people are scared, they tend to be more conservative in terms of their mindset. Now, I don't think Trump is a conservative, but I do think that he's marketing himself as one, and people are more likely to vote Republican when things are very unstable domestically and across the world. So that's what I think Trump has going for him. Kamala, what she has going for her is, I think a lot of Americans, myself included, whether we like Biden or not, feel like that there's no one really at the wheel right now with Biden, because like I said on our last show, I do think that he has dementia. It does feel like that's in some instances we are on autopilot. And I think what Kamala brings to the table that Biden wasn't going to bring is the idea that there is someone who's actually awake. You may not agree with her policies, but she is, I don't want to say younger, because I don't believe that age is a factor in this, but I do think the mental capacity is a factor. And I do think that Biden is lacking on that. So I think that Kamala, unlike Biden, actually could give the impression that there will be someone at the driver's seat. What I do think that she is missing, though, is, and I have to watch the 60 Minutes interview, I didn't get a chance to watch it yet, is there needs to be a little more transparency outside of the rallies, because I think that she has not spoken to the press as much as she could have.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump, he backed out of the 60 Minutes debate. And I think that's why people like yourself and like me were very thankful to see that vice presidential debate, because people were actually doing what candidates have traditionally done.
No, I think you hit it spot on. I mean, the only thing I have to add is isn't that the bare minimum, is nominating somebody who is competent and able to perform the duties?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But
or not even competent, but there, right? Somebody who doesn't have dementia.
I agree. But I think Biden in 2020 is not the same Biden as 2024.
I totally agree with you on that. And I'm not saying that the Democrats shouldn't have nominated Biden in 2020. Obviously, they made the right decision in taking him off the ticket these days. Um, but if our one if our one strong point for Kamala is, hey, she's not Biden and doesn't have dementia, right? Then I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't necessarily give me a reason to vote for her because Joe Biden's not in the equation anymore. So I just to add to the perspective as far as the strengths of a candidate, right? I think establishing a baseline of mental fitness, like I said, I think that's a bare minimum. I wouldn't trust a dementia patient to drive me back to my house from the park, right? Let alone put them in charge of, our country and setting the policies. And I understand that Democrats, they'll say, hey, well, look at Trump, he's deranged, right? And they're trying to put the age question on him now as a 78-year-old man, and I totally agree that he's older. Don't get me wrong, but the fact of the matter is he is miles ahead of what Biden is, right? And I think mentally speaking, he's able to compete with Kamala as far as being there and being present. And they'll cite his rallies. Oh, he goes on and on and on. And I understand that, listen, they're long rallies and he does ramble and he speaks very conversationally, but that's not a matter of mentally being there or not, or being mentally deficient. It's a matter of speaking tones, right? I mean, that's what they always had said about Trump, is that he speaks like the people. He speaks very plainly. He's not going to add all these political remarks to his speeches. That's how he appeals to a lot of blue collar voters in places like PA, and even here in Jersey. I mean, you've seen some of the shifts here that we've seen in New Jersey, in more South Jersey, who have increasingly voted for Trump, especially during presidential or federal years. Then Cumberland County used to be strong Democrat territory. Salem County used to vote for Democrats. Atlantic County, strong Democrat territory, right? Now you see them. Gloucester County, same thing. Now you see them, far more in line with, being swing counties or even Republican counties. So, and that has a lot of factors that go into that. I mean, obviously, Mike Testa down in Cumberland has done a lot to tighten up the reins over there, over in Vineland area. But, getting back to my point though, I don't see. If we're making this a question about character, I understand that a lot of people have questions about Trump's character. However, I don't see that many strong attributes to Kamala's character. I don't think that this is an election of, oh, I'm excited to vote for her because she is, somebody who is well deserving of the office of president. I don't buy that. I'm not buying into that argument, right? I don't necessarily agree with that. And, because of that, I mean, it makes people like me, and you see a lot of young men doing this too, is focusing on the policies, focusing on some of the issues that are important to our time, whether it be the wars that are ongoing or the finances or the economy, the budget, all those sort of things. So, overall, I mean, we'll see what happens. But you're right. I mean, it's razor thin. It's going to be 50-50. And, we'll see how it goes, I guess, on election day. I mean, these polls, you can just never tell until election day. This election feels very 2016-esque to me, not going to lie.
I agree.
It's one of those scenarios of like, oh, well, it's Trump, but then it's also this person who isn't necessarily of, she's not really impressing anybody with her abilities. And I totally agree. She's fumbling the ball. If I was Kamala right now, I'd be going in front of every TV screen that would put me on their air, right? She went on the Call Her Daddy podcast, right? That one about, are you familiar with that podcast?
No, I heard about it.
It's all about explicit topics that are really relegated to the bedroom, which nothing wrong with that.
I mean, Jimmy Carter gave an interview to Playboy, so it's not like it's something new, but I get what you're saying.
It's not, but it's definitely a play for.
And listen, he just turned 100 years old, so it's no harm there.
Yeah, happy birthday, Jimmy. Happy birthday, Jimmy. So yeah, I mean, like I said, we'll see how it kind of goes. I mean, I asked you last week, about the states, and let's just keep it going until now until election day. Who do you think's going to win? And actually, before we get there, I do want to ask you, we have Hurricane Milton coming to barrel the state of Florida. They say this is going to be one of the most dangerous hurricanes, in the history of the United States. And first off, our thoughts and prayers go out to all the people down there. Please evacuate if you can. Please get safe. Call the authorities if you have trouble getting out. If you're in an evacuation zone, the mayor of Tampa said, if you are in an evacuation zone and you don't leave, you are going to die, right? And she, as the mayor of Tampa, has seen lots of storms, and she said she's never said that before. But with this storm, that's the case. So, our safety message is get out and get safe. Even going inland helps. I mean, you're in those coastal areas, it's tragic. But overall, how do you think that this might affect and I don't like to make tragedies political, but how do you think that this affects the politics in a state like Florida and North Carolina, which has been just devastated by the hurricane that that was the Helene that came through North Carolina and Georgia too. Some of the two big swing states, Georgia, North Carolina. I mean, we're looking at some impacts ahead of Election Day. I'm just curious your thoughts.
I do think Florida is more of a red state now, but here's the thing. And this may be an out there answer, but I think, and I don't know who voted for FEMA and who didn't, but if Rick Scott voted against funding FEMA, he has put his neck on the line. The only thing, and if I were the Democratic opponent, I would be running as for all of that. Now, here's the problem. If Florida's getting hurricanes, there's going to be a lot of power outages and there could be internet outages. That may actually make it hard to get the message out there. So that's something that I think the Democrat could potentially campaign off of. The problem is you might want to do it sooner rather than later because people may not have power for days, weeks.
Well, I think we're completely ignoring the fact that, I mean, the story came out that the Biden-Harris administration used $640 million of FEMA funds to fund the transportation of illegal migrants who came to this country.
I'm sorry, I just want to. Forbes debunked that notion. The Biden-Harris administration did not do that. I believe that at first as well. I checked Forbes. Forbes, which is not a left-wing source by any means, said that did not happen.
Well, I will say I also fact checked this, and I found articles dating back to when it was originally happening that the Biden-Harris administration did use FEMA funds for the transportation. I mean, that was what the article said. It was $640 million. I don't know if that's exactly the extent of the money. It could have been more, it could have been less. But the White House press secretary at the time did confirm that FEMA funds were being used in regards to transporting and housing migrants and providing them the resources that they needed at the time, right? They did say in some aspect that was happening, right? That came directly from the White House and the Department of Homeland Security. They released an article, I believe it was back in March, when this was happening. That being said, the aspect, even the perception that happened, do you know how damaging that is for the Democrats as far as giving North Carolina hurricane victims $750, right? And you have half the country that thinks, or maybe even more than half of the country that thinks that you gave $640 million to illegal immigrants. I mean, especially at a time when that's probably one of the biggest issues of this election.
Right.
As I said last week, just below the economy is immigration. That's huge. I mean, that's insane to me as far as some of these headlines that we're seeing. And obviously, like we said, you have to sift through the truth of them, because I'm not somebody to read a headline and be like, oh yeah, wow, that's crazy, right? I'm somebody who reads a headline, looks into it, finds the article that was put out by official sources, and then confirms it. And they did confirm it to be true.
Which fact checker did it? And we only have 90 seconds, but which fact checker confirmed this?
It was an article. It was published by the Department of Homeland Security, right? Who oversees FEMA when it originally happened. I'll share the article with you.
Okay.
I'll share it with you, and we could share it out there. But and I just think that politically speaking, it's going to be big. I mean, as far as voting turnout in some of these swing states, it's going to impact that, and it's going to impact the messaging too. So
it could.
Lots to see here.
I agree. Although, if that is in fact the case, and I'm not sure it is, Biden is not the first president, if in fact he is not the first president to use FEMA funds for migrants. But I will have to confirm that because I read the Forbes article and they debunked it. But we have 30 seconds left. So Aiden, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to send you this. Check out the Scarlet State on Spotify and check out the Blue Dog Whisperer on YouTube and Spotify.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right. Take care. Bye.